Hello and welcome back to Max Out Your Life podcast. My name is Cody Reinhardt, and as always, Mr. Brad Peel.
Good evening.
Today we are moving into talking about macros. This one we actually got from a client. We asked about, hey, what do you want to hear about? And she talked about this. And so what we're talking about today is we're talking about how macros are more important than calories, right? Most time you just talk to people and they don't honestly know what macros are. I mean, that's been my experience. What about the clients you've worked with?
Yeah, I think they usually know like proteins, fats, carbs, but as far as like breakdown in their diet, not really. Percentage wise, no clue.
Yeah.
So that's been the biggest thing, is figuring out or just helping them understand percentages that they need for each little group. And kind of going from there.
Yeah. And this is the big thing that if you really want your physique, your body to change, this is really where it comes down to is macros over calories. If you ever talked with someone who, let's say, lost a bunch of weight, generally speaking, it's they ate less calories and they started running. That's a pretty common one. And the problem is although you lost weight, they're like, yeah, but I kind of look the same, right? Like my body looks the same. And that's because you may have lost the body weight or the body fat, but there's not any muscle really underneath it. And so when you want the actual physique to change, you have to make sure that, one, you're strength training, which we're not talking about today, but the macros in and of themselves, like how much protein are you eating, how much fat are you eating, how much carbs are you eating, and are the amount that you're eating actually match your training, right? Yeah. Like not only your training, but also your lifestyle. If you sit at a desk, then your macros are going to look a lot different than someone who works out, 12, 15 hours a week? What are you at right now? 20 hours a week?
Yeah, I mean, in height, like peaking more, 4 hours a day.
Yeah. So obviously you're a full-time coach, so you're on your feet all day long. Like your macros are going to look significantly different. And then, different to, someone who's 60 or 70 years old, like all going to look different, right? So it's not like it's not just as simple as a calculator, but at least a calculation will get you in the right direction, right? Like it's having to know all these little tiny things. And before I forget, for all the listeners, we do have a macro calculator as well as a serving sizes calculator, because those are two different ways we're going to talk about it today. That you'll be able to get it. If you're watching this on YouTube, then it'll be in the description. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, it'll be in the show notes. So you can click on it. It'll take you to it, and you can check it out. And like I said, it'll at least get you started in the right direction. And then we're going to kind of tell you a little bit about how to know how to make some of these changes and really just be able to get things started. So
and I just want to start diving into breaking down the macros on what they are, the main three, and then just kind of going into the general function of each, because like you're saying, they have different roles and they do different functions based off the lifestyle. So just kind of starting off with that, and I think that'll just give us a great great base for the rest of what we're going to talk about.
Because if you understand like what the macros are, and like you said, like what's the purpose, it makes it a lot easier to understand like how much I need of what, right? This is, and misunderstanding this is why you have a big crowd of people who are like anti-carb, because they think carbs make you fat. It's like, that's not actually the case at all. It's what it probably is. Now I'm making a wild assumption here, not knowing who the person that I'm talking to, but what it probably is an overall consumption of too much.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what's the carb that did that? It's like, well, what I've found is that for most people, it's actually too little protein. I mean, if I had to prioritize these in terms of importance, it would definitely be protein. Like protein would be the top, right? That's protein is the one that's going to allow us to build muscle, maintain muscle, and overall be able to help with recovery. I'm not saying the other ones don't, but if I'm eating too little protein and I'm running or lifting weights or being very active, like the protein is going to be the one that's going to help the most out of all of those. And so that's always the one that I start off with. So when you're working with a client, how much protein do you usually prescribe for someone? Say they're sedentary, Mrs. Jones, she's an accountant and she's not really doing a whole lot right now. She's not even really working out. She's not walking. What would you usually give her as her kind of first step for her protein?
Yeah, so it kind of depends a little bit based off, how overweight. If she's like really overweight, I wouldn't give her like 300 grams of protein because that would be bad.
Really bad, yeah.
But in general, about 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
If they're overweight, like what I did with, I shouldn't have said that, but I was helping my wife get her macros. She's not overweight, by the way. You're not overweight.
Good save.
She wanted to get down to 140, and she was at 150. And so I just took her protein down to that goal weight of 140 and just kept her there. So it's only 10 more grams, but that's a way that you could do it too. If you're a little outside of your goal weight, instead of giving yourself the protein that you're currently at body weight, just lower it down to maybe the 5 or 10 pounds less that you want.
Yeah.
But in general, pretty close to body weight.
Yeah. And that's usually what I do too. If they're really big, what I found that works really well is take their height in centimeters and use that. And that's what I give them in terms of grams.
Huh.
Yeah. So I don't remember the math right off the top of my head, but at one point I was working with a client and they were 173 centimeters. So 173 grams of protein is what I gave, and they were over 300 pounds.
Yeah.
So that's definitely another way of looking at it. But like like we just started talking about, it's also dependent upon their activity level. So, using that 0.8 per gram of body weight, sometimes even less, but generally like that 7.7 to 0.8 tends to be kind of the good point for that. And so then what I found is the most interesting part about helping people with protein is getting them to understand like what an actual protein source is. Like, oh, well, I eat peanut butter or I have avocado, and it's like, well, that's not a protein source, right?
Yeah.
Like go to protein sources. And when I'm first working with somebody, eggs, chicken, steak, like any sort of meat, fish obviously is good protein, also has a lot of fat, so that's something you have to consider. And then if you have someone that's a vegan, that becomes a little bit harder. And I don't work with a whole lot of vegans, but even somebody who's a little bit more plant-based and maybe they don't want to eat a ton of meats, eggs are going to be your kind of go-to. You're also looking at things like yogurt, beef jerky. Those are going to be your actual protein sources. And what I do to help people break those up, so it's not like, well, I don't want to have eggs every single day, or I don't want to have chicken like every single day. Like, okay, well, how many different ways can we make chicken? So it's not just chicken and then chicken and then chicken and then chicken. Like maybe one day it's on the grill, and then maybe one day it's marinated, another day it's in a salad, another day it's in a soup. They're like, oh, well, yeah, I could do that. And so that's kind of how I like to break things up, so you have enough variety that keeps you consistent with it.
Yeah, which is important if you struggle with eating the same thing.
Yeah,
I can do it pretty well, like especially for like breakfast and lunch.
Yeah.
I eat like the same thing almost every day. But
I really need my variety on the weekends.
Yeah.
And the way we do that is we either find recipes that we can make. Like, I mean, I have lasagna during the week, but let's say I want something that just feels like, you know what I mean? They got good stuff. And it's like, hey, we're going to make pizza or lasagna or tacos or enchiladas or something like that. And I may not have enchiladas during the week, and then I have it on the weekend, and it gives me that, like, I feel good that I don't need to go out and go to Marco's and go kill a whole extra large pizza.
Yeah. Plus, you can pack it with as much protein as you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And usually on days like that, if I do it, it's always I'll like drink a protein shake with it when I'm having pizza, so that I don't overdo it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if we got more on protein. I mean,
I feel like I kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
Cha-ching.
So next one would be carbs, carbohydrates.
And see, I actually do, if we're doing them in orders of how I apply them, I actually apply fats first.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we can talk about fat.
Yeah. And the reason I do that is because fats are not only going to help you feel fuller, but it also helps with like hormone levels as well. What has a tendency to happen is carbs get prescribed too much quickly, and then it's like, oh, whatever's left, we'll throw it on the fats. And then what ends up happening is people end up having a lot of hormonal issues, and we don't realize it. I had this for a long time because I always ate such a lower fat, I guess you could say, I don't know, 60 or 70 grams of fat, like all the time. And that was way too low. And I was wondering why I was always so tired. And so I thought it was carbs, and I'd eat more carbs, and it actually didn't make me feel better at all, made me feel worse. And then it's because my fats were too low. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to prescribe fats first, because what fats are really doing are fats are helping with brain function, and they're helping with overall energy when you're not doing some sort of high intensity workout, which is the majority of your life, right? And so I like to give those first. And those are your nuts, your seeds, your avocado. Obviously, you're getting fats from things like fish, but your main things, the nuts and the seeds. I prefer seeds in my own kind of thing of what I like, because they help lower with inflammation. Most Western diets, the omega-3 to omega-6 imbalance is just off the freaking charts. And so by eating more of the seeds, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds are my favorite, and eating more of those will help lower inflammation. Also helps with your gut health, which is another very underrated thing. We don't have enough time to talk about that today, but we will talk about gut health. And so I really like the nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cheese or dairy.
Can't do it.
Can't do it.
Can't do it, man.
Yeah, it's hard for the lactose people.
Yeah, I'm lactose sensitive, I guess you could say. Like if I eat it, I just get super nasally. You know, I sound kind of like I sound right now because of my allergies. So like I have to be very selective. I'm like, is this pizza worth it? And some days it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any more fats?
I mean, obviously there are a ton others, but I mean, when I'm prescribing stuff, it's like the easier the better, right? Like out of these, which are the ones that you would eat or not eat, you know? And actually, when our listeners go and check out that calculator, we have a list of each one of these macronutrients for them.
Perfect.
Proteins, carbs, and fats, and a lot of different ways of looking at it, so they can, like I said, so you can get started with it today.
Yeah, and you were saying fat super important for hormonal function.
Exactly, and especially you start getting older, you know, females, especially when you start getting like premenopausal, not having enough fat is very detrimental. Or a woman after they've had kids, like it's huge in the hormonal area. And so if we're looking at, well, I guess we're not talking about percentages yet, so I'll save that.
Yeah, not quite.
Yeah, I'll save that.
Okay. Carbs.
They're good. I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a favorite?
Pizza? Is that a carb?
There's carbs in it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think carbs are definitely that thing that's been demonized. You know, it was like, what, back in the 90s, it was fat. I think fats were first, and then carbs were the next demon. And like, oh my gosh, you can't eat this. Everything's got to be low carb and low fat. And it's, you know, you obviously have the thing called the glycemic index, which is going to determine how much of your body, your insulin is actually going to spike when you're eating it, right? But what this side of that people don't talk about as much is it also determines how much of the carbs are with any other type of the food. If I'm eating just carbs, my insulin is going to spike even higher. If I'm eating carbs with a fat, which has a slower digestion rate, my insulin is not going to spike nearly as high. So while I'm not saying go and eat a ton of high glycemic stuff and be spiking your blood sugar all the time, what I am saying is that by having a balance of these things in a meal will also make a difference as well. So like carbohydrates, if you're looking at your quote unquote what people call your good carbs, those are your sweet potatoes and your brown rice. But the interesting thing is, for the longest time, I always fell into that camp of like brown rice is better than white rice. What about you? Are you a brown rice person, a white rice person?
Jasmine rice.
Jasmine rice,
Yep.
okay. Everyone's like, oh, well, brown rice is so much better because of da-da-da. The only difference is a little bit of fiber, and that's it. There's not really that much difference in it.
Yeah.
So if I'm having my white rice and I'm eating it with a good healthy fat, then it's actually, or fiber from vegetables or whatever else, like it's not really that different, right? It's like the difference between a baked potato and a sweet potato. Like, if you want a sweet potato, great. If you want a baked potato, great. Now, if that baked potato has like sour cream and cheese and bacon, like, okay, that's a little bit different. Yeah, that's a little bit different of a story. And you probably have like 3 meals worth of fat in one meal. But overall speaking, carbs are your number one primary source that your body wants to use when you're in high intensity. Like, the thing that's really interesting, especially people who are like really, really low carb, what you'll find is that a lot of them actually have a lot of joint issues, and that jet is really loud. Sorry guys, we live right next to an Air Force base, and so they're doing something out there today. own personal flyby.
It's nice.
People that have the really low carb diets, they happen to have joint issues because the fluid in our joints it uses carbs to help regenerate. And so when you are really low carb, you end up not having enough fluid in your joints and you end up having a lot of issues. Any person that is saying to not eat an entire food category, in my opinion, you should run the other way. The reason things like keto were, we'll say, invented in the first place were things like epilepsy. They were like medical issues for it. Then all of a sudden people were like, oh, dang, so you're telling me I can put a stick of butter in my coffee and this is healthy? Okay, so if you're telling me so I could just eat a stick of butter, then is that just as healthy?
Yeah. Do it.
Do it. It's not, right? Like you have to have a proper balance to everything. So I think that's the issue with carbs is people look at them as there's something that's bad. If you're lifting weights, if you're doing any sort of workout with intensity, especially if you're playing sports, you have to have carbs. But then you look at someone who is like a runner or shorter distance runner. Maybe they don't need as many carbs, but they definitely need carbs. And then you look at someone like an ultra marathoner, right? Like the really crazy people, they need carbs, believe it or not. You're going for that amount of distance, you have to have carbs, especially if a lot of these ultra marathoners are like, it's on some sort of trail. Like it's not like a track that they're running around for 100 miles. That would be the freaking worst.
Yeah.
But even those guys have to have carbs. So carbs are definitely a very much needed necessity in life.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, it just comes down to the proper balance. You need 50, 55, maybe even 60% carbs when you're in your peak of training. And Sally, who works in finance, who works out 3 hours a day, maybe she only needs like 35 to 40. And the balance and the other stuff. But you see what I'm saying? Like, that's where the difference comes down to. If Sally eats as many carbs as you are, well, then yeah, she's going to have a lot of issues.
Yeah.
If you eat as much as Sally's eating, you're going to have a lot of issues. I mean, I guess you're kind of experiencing that right now because you're on this weight cut,
yeah,
right?
Weight cut, carbs are pretty low.
Yeah.
But I'm also not
also,
training hard.
Yeah, you adjusted your training to match what you were doing so you could still lose the weight that you needed to, but still perform at the same time, which is most people, they go on a cut and they just smash it to ribbons. They're like, I'm just going to eat nothing. I'm like, well, that works, but it trashes everything else.
Yeah, you got to change your lifestyle if you're going to change your food that much.
Yeah, exactly.
So as far as breaking it down, getting people's numbers, the calculator obviously helps, but the order, you said you would go protein,
then fat,
then
carbs.
fat, and then carbs.
Yep.
And then kind of breaking it down from finding the lifestyle that you have.
Yep.
Okay, so let's kind of dive into that a little bit more. Let's just go with the Sally, Mrs. Jones. What kind of percentages are you prescribing there, and how do you break that down for them? So let's say they work a desk job, they walk for their exercise 3 to 5 times a week. They don't have a gym membership, maybe do stuff at home, yoga or Pilates, but for the most part,
just kind of walking. Yeah.
Aerobic based, almost 24/7.
Okay. And that's a pretty common person. So on it, you can definitely start the protein a little bit lower. Like you were mentioning before, like 0.8 is probably where I'd put them at. And then I would take their fats at probably 40%, depending on, once again, how old they are. That kind of stuff would also affect that. But I'd say roughly around 40%, and then the rest I would fill with carbs. That's how I'd kind of break that down. So to give an exact number to that, I mean, I'd have to know how tall they are and how old they are, and there's a few other factors. But generally speaking, take your body weight, or take the overall amount of calories they would need, and 40% of that would be towards fat. Take their body weight, and we would do 0.8 times their body weight. And then whatever was rest in the calories, that's what I would recommend for the carbs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that, like I said, that's just a starting point.
Right.
Like you may get going, it's like, oh man, I'm way hungry all the time. It's like, okay, well, maybe we need to adjust this a little bit. Or I'm really full, which is the pretty common one when you start having people actually eat more, because most people undereat. That it would more than likely have to be like a small step up, or what's a lot of people know this as is a reverse diet. So let's say they've been eating 1,200 calories and they need to be eating, 1,800 calories. I don't want to go to that overnight. I would like slowly bump it up about like 10% a week is really what I would do until I got them to the 1,800 they need to be at. Now for this person, they probably don't need 18 if they're just walking, but it also depends how much they weigh, what's their goal weight, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then as the intensity increases, so let's say the same person starts wanting to train harder, or you keep the protein the same, maybe bump it a little bit.
Yeah, bump it up a little bit, yeah.
And then you're just lowering the fats from 40 to maybe 35, and then as intensity goes up, 30.
Generally speaking, somewhere in that part, yeah. And for people that maybe are, I'll call them more advanced, I also give this as an option if people can do it. And you basically start alternating between higher carb days and lower carb days. Some people just like to be able to just prep the same thing every day, and that's fine too. But if you can have this ability for your body to adjust how much it's burning between carbs and burning fats, you have what's called metabolic flexibility. And this is something that Dr. Mike T. Nelson talks about a lot when I went through his nutrition certification as well. He talks a lot about metabolic flexibility. And then on the days where you're training harder, you're intaking more carbohydrates, and then on the day where you're not, or you're doing very leisurely stuff, your intake of fat is up and your carbs go down. And by doing that, your body is always able to switch back and forth in whatever source is actually needed to do the activity. And so it helps. That's if you've ever quote unquote missed a meal and you start getting that really hangry feeling, that's usually because there's not enough carbohydrates in the body. And so your body's like really starting to need something. And if you can switch into that fat source, because fat is definitely going to be more sustainable, there's just no real power that comes out of a higher fat diet. You take a bodybuilder and that last little bit of their, prep for a competition, they're almost like no carbs. And then they're almost like no fats too. But that energy starts to tank pretty quick as soon as you start cutting carbs out.
Mm-hmm. So as far as you're getting started, you've never tracked macros before, you want to try and prioritize getting the right amount in, and let's say food logging isn't quite there for you yet.
Yeah. For most people it's not too. That's okay.
Yeah, which is fine. How would you help someone who doesn't want to food log or just can't stay with that discipline to make sure they're getting the right amount of protein, fats, and carbs throughout the day?
So there's two different ones. One is the serving size method, or the plate method, sorry, and the other one is the hand method. So if you look at a serving of protein, we're going to say that's about the thickness of the hand and the palm here, or you could say a deck of cards, and that's a serving of protein. Serving of carbs is if you were to make a hand, a cup in cupping shape like this, like you're trying to hold water, that's a serving of carbs. Serving of fat is the length of your thumb, and a serving of vegetables is a fist. So then what you would look at is like, okay, how many servings do I need of each one of those throughout the day? And then the plate method is you look down at the plate and you say, okay, I'm looking down at the plate. Half of it should be fruits and vegetables, a quarter of it should be carbohydrates, and a quarter of it should be protein. And that'll at least get you in the ballpark of eating the amount that you need to eat, as long as you're eating enough of those servings throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Would you really try and get a client to the point where they can track food?
Honestly, I find it does better if that's a personal preference for them.
Yeah.
In the 10 years I've been coaching, I'd say there's only a handful of people that actually track on a consistent basis. I have them track when we're trying to figure out something, like say they're not losing any weight. I'm like, dang, what's going on? And then I have them track their food. It's like, oh, well, that's why we're actually over. You're eating a little bit more than you thought. And then it's like, okay, so how we're going to do this is cut your oatmeal in half that you're having for breakfast, and you're doing one serving of peanut butter. We're going to cut that back to a half a serving, and then bam, they start losing weight. Yeah. And then I have other clients like, yeah, I really like it. It helps keep me on track. It allows me to know how to interchange things. So it's really up to them, because it comes all the way back to what is sustainable. And if tracking macros is not sustainable for you, then, why are we doing it? Literally all you're going to do is fail at that point. And then I failed you as a coach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. If you can't do it,
why do it?
Yeah. then you're not going to get anywhere from
Yeah,
it.
that's
I think the plate method is a great one, or even the hand one, because then you can at least gauge.
Exactly. And it really comes down to what the overall goal is. Like if that person wanted to walk on stage as a physique competitor or bikini competitor, I'm sorry, dude. Like if you want to reach your goal, you got to weigh your food.
Yeah,
you know
got to weigh and track everything.
Yeah, everything. At least when you're in prep. And if that's not your goal and it's just general health and wellness, then yeah, that's totally fine. Now, if you want to, get a little more specific with your goal, then yeah, some things would have to change. But generally speaking, you want to be healthier so you can hike with your kids and, go do a 14-footer in Colorado or get back on an adult league. Like the plate method, the hand method, serving sizes, all of those will absolutely get you there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So for the listeners right now, we have the calculator.
Yep. Macro and serving size.
That they can check out to kind of at least get a starting point.
Yep.
And then would you recommend anything else as far as maybe coaches reach out to, or some accounts on social media, or anything that they can do to kind of get this macro more fine-tuned in their life?
Yeah, if they're finding, once they start with the calculation there and they're finding that either one, they're just not able to stick with it, or two, they're having questions. Reaching out to us on either Instagram or on Facebook at Lionheart APF, Alpha Papa Foxtrot on that, or just our website is lionheartapf.com, and just reaching out and seeing what kind of questions we can answer for them. Like I said, the whole purpose of this was to get people going, and a calculation is just that, just to get you going.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's awesome. I think that kind of wraps up our macro podcast.
Yep. All right. I feel like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time.